Hello, I'm Allie Ringeisen, a sales account specialist with Winfield United, and today I'm joined by Jeff Jackson, our U.S. product manager and forage specialist. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, everybody. So if you don't know me or haven't seen anything from me before, I have the opportunity and the pleasure to be a forage specialist for Cropland and Winfield United. I cover alfalfa. I get to be the U.S. product manager for the sorghum program, and that would be forage sorghums, which includes the single cut forage sorghum, sorghum Sudan grass, pearl millet, and I also manage the grain sorghum program. And we are starting a brand new triticale program. So plate's full, got lots going on. So here we are talking about feed today, I think. So
Yeah,
that's a little
we're
bit
gonna talk
about
about
what I do.
we're gonna talk about sorghums today. Do you want to kick us off with kind of a state of union on the current sorghum market?
Yeah, so what we have going on today, and it's an interesting one. We generally, in our industry, in our brand specifically, we usually carry over about 25 to 30% inventory. We have kind of a cushion in the background. In 2023, we'd went through a couple years of really dry conditions across the US. And then in 2023, we had really good conditions for planting feed, particularly sorghum crops and sorghum Sudan grass, and we sold a lot. The whole industry really cleaned the shelves last year, so we didn't get many returns and we carried over less than normal. So that's one of the first things that set the stage. Is everybody had a great year last year. Second thing would be is that in Texas, where literally 99.9% of the sorghum is grown for us to sell again, all the seed production is done in Texas. And if you remember, last spring, May and June, Texas had a lot of moisture, a lot of rain. And when we plant the male and the female plants to make the hybrid that we sell, the next year, generally they plant the female and then they'll come in and plant the male at three different timings so that there's a long pollen shed and we can get that female plant fertilized. Well, if you plant the female and it rains for 3 days, now your planting timing is off to put the male crop in there to get the pollination correct. It kind of got out of sync with they call it the nick of getting male and female lined up so it would pollinate at the right time. So now we have a little bit of a short production year because the nick is off. And then when you have a highly concentrated area of sorghum seed production and a hailstorm comes through, there's a pretty good chance that some of it's going to get destroyed. And we had one of those events come through. So there's ding number three. And then we had an early frost. So if the seed's not fully mature and the seed freezes and it breaks the seed coat, now we have a germ issue. So there are multiple things. And come ordering season for 2024, November, December, January, February, March, we had tremendous sales. So right now, Allie, on the single cut forage sorghum where people would want to do a silage crop, there's probably a pretty good supply across the board because it's a lower volume use product. One of those bags might cover 10 acres, where sorghum Sudan grass bag covers about 2 acres or even 1 acre, depending on a bag to the acre, depending on which product you plant. So today, we have a short supply on sorghum Sudan grasses, and here we are, and we're down to about 2 products that we really have much supply of. Otherwise, it's get what you can get, plant what you can plant. It might be one of those conversations this year that we don't get so picky about which variety, but we might say, yep, plant it, it'll turn green, make a turd, it'll be all fine. But it might be one of those years.
It kind of sounds like it was a perfect storm to kind of have a mess.
It was a perfect storm to have us set up in a really weird situation. The good news is there still are some supplies out there, and you might not get option one. You might not get option two. Option three might be sold out. The cool thing about our system is we really try not to put bad products in a bag. So even though you might not get A, B, or C, option D might be really good. And we've got some people and some products that after multiple years of use and trial, and we can twist and we can manipulate the management of a few things to make them fit very well. I'm really confident that we'll get through this year. We'll have a great year. And we can still place products. You just have to ask a few questions if you're not familiar with them, and we'll get through it. And I can help you. I don't want this to sound too weird, but there are ways to make products do things if we change the planting rate, change the style drill or the planter we use, and do some different things on harvest timing and how we harvest that crop that we can almost mimic or fill that gap. Just ask questions and I'll help you through it all.
Well, you touched on our next topic, seeding rate, but I do want to hit on one thing before we move on. Would
Yeah.
you suspect that we'll also have issues in 25? Is that something that growers and retailers should have on their mind to plan to book early to alleviate and get to the pile first?
My production plan today, I did not go crazy, shoot the moon, double production, all those. I have us protected to the point where we will produce about 140 or 150% of what we should sell. So about 1.5 times. So that we have room for growth and we should get caught up, which is great. So get after it. There'll be people looking.
Perfect.
So yes, thank you for asking that question. As long as we don't have a horrific weather event or something really weird happens in between, the production acres that we have lined up and I'm going to call it the alliances we have in the industry for supply, I would say I feel very comfortable today, not having a repeat. But again, we didn't expect it to be up and sell 130% of normal last year and then have a crappy year for production at the same time. So we'll deal with it and it'll be fine. Good
Right. So
question.
my understanding is still plan ahead, but
I think so this has been my advice for a number of years, coming from the retail side, also being a district sales manager, SDM. I tell people generally, if you have a history of selling 2,000 bags of sorghum Sudan grass, let's get 1,600 of those bags on order. You have a pretty good educated guess on what the growers are going to need for your area. Work with me, work with you. I would say 80% should probably be kind of on order or tied up ahead of time. And then you start placing orders off of that pile so you're not caught in a bad spot. But that's generally my rule is 80% is pretty comfortable because you can still return some if you get caught in a weird situation where weather's not right and you can't plant forages or feed. So I think 80% is a good rule.
Perfect. That sounds really good. So on to our next topic, seeding rates. I know there are some differences in the industry. Explain a little bit more about how that works and the seeding rates that we have for Cropland.
I'll give you the Jeff Jackson answer to that, obviously, because like you said, there are a lot of various opinions and or sales procedures out there. So let's start with the single cut forage sorghum silage types. They are generally, so we're going to talk about the planter and the planting rate all in the same combination because it fits very well. So they are generally planted with a planter, being a corn planter or soybean planter. And what I mean by soybean planter would be a interplant, the 30-15 splits that some of these planters have on them, or 20-inch rows, 15-inch rows, however your planter's set up. But we generally use a sorghum disc, a 60 cell or a 90 cell in a row unit corn planter like that, our soybean planter. That allows us to get really good singulation so the plants all have good space, kind of like planting corn, but at a higher population, like 3x, okay? We want to have them singulated so they can have space and not get too crowded. I have seen recommendations all over the board from 4 pounds to 12 pounds. When I talk to all the breeders in Texas, and I have this discussion every year just to make sure I'm not retarded for some reason, and I'll say, hey guys, product XYZ, what rate should we plant that? And it is a resounding 60,000 to 90,000, maybe up to 120,000 seeds per acre. Most of these products are averaging about 15,000. We get some up to 20,000 seeds per pound. So if we're 15,000 seeds per pound and we run 4 pounds, we're at 60,000. That's a good number. 5 pounds is really good. We can get into the 6 pound range, which gets us up to 90,000 seeds per acre on a 15,000 seed count bag. I don't ever recommend anybody planting over 6 pounds of our Cropland branded products, period. Unless, like our prior conversation started, I'm trying to manipulate something to act more like a sorghum Sudan grass, then I'll say, okay, let's talk about how we can do this. But generally speaking, Allie, it's going to be 4 pounds on specific products. I've got one that we started out at 3.5 pounds and people called me nuts. They're like, we don't plant sorghum at 3.5 pounds. You're an idiot. And I said, well, I've studied this product. We've done it in multiple environments, different. So that's my job, right? Is to understand how they work the best to get the best crop. So when I tell you 3.5 to 4 pounds, I kind of mean it. It doesn't mean he's an idiot. Let's plant 12 because more is better. Because if you think about planting even 10 pounds at 15,000. That's like planting corn at 150,000 seeds per acre in a 30-inch row. What would happen to that?
Not gonna be
You would
good.
have stems this big and it would all fall down, right? And too much competition for moisture, fertilizer, light, all those things will impact. If somebody hears 10 pounds or even over 6, they should be cautious on why. And just ask the question, why? And correlate it back to planting corn at some of those populations, because we're literally trying to chop a silage crop. Planting rate, single cut forage sorghum, 4 to 6. Really comfort zone for us. There are people that will say, I want to plant a single cut forage sorghum, but I don't own a corn planter. I'm not going to go find a corn planter. I have a drill. It's already sitting in the yard. I'm a cowboy. I don't have row crop equipment. Can I use my drill? My answer is yes. You will get varied results. But if you take a drill at 7.5-inch spacings and try to set it at 4 pounds, you will not get it open far enough for the seed to even really flow out of the drill gap in that mechanism. So what I tell people to do is take some of your fantastic gray duct tape, get in the drill, plug 2 holes, plant out of every third one. So leave the end one open, plug 2, plant out of 1, plug 2, all the way across. That way you're planting out of every third row. Your spacing will be about 22.5 inches, and you're going to set the drill at 12 pounds so that you get 4 pounds out of every third row. So that gives you a wider gap on the drill metering unit so you can get the sorghum to flow. That works okay, but still it's a controlled spill at 4 pounds to the acre. So it's not going to look nearly as good or produce, it'll produce well, but not quite as good as being in rows singulated with the planter. On to sorghum Sudan grasses. Higher volume use rate, 25 pounds, 30 pounds sometimes. There are people that will plant a whole bag to the acre and plant 50 pounds of sorghum Sudan grasses. I think that's completely wasteful on seed. Part of the reason they're trying to plant 50 pounds, Allie, is because they have a crappy product. And then they need to have a fine stem so the cows will even try to eat it. So you take the cheapest sorghum Sudan grass out there, which we sell one called Honey Sweet. The original text sheet I wrote on that says, will grow, turns green, make a turd. And that's about all I wrote on the text sheet. Somebody's like, you can't put that out there. That shows that you don't have any confidence in that product. I said, no, that tells me that it is a cheap product. You're getting what you pay for. It's just a little better than cardboard and it'll keep cows alive.
And you're being honest.
So we have way better products than that. All of our tech sheets will say 25 pounds. Plant it with the drill, 7.5-inch spacing's fine. If you get up to that, an 11.5-inch soybean special type drill, those work very well as well. But again, we're going to set that thing at about 25 pounds. You can go up to 30 if you want to push it. There are some guys in some harsher environments that say, we put a little more seed on because we have such a crappy environment. Our chances of getting most of them to come up kind of stink anyway, so we're going to put a little extra on just to cover some bases. So planting rate, single cut forage sorghum, sorghum Sudan grass, the pearl millets. Pearl millet also through the drill. We're going to try to get the pearl millet about 1/2 inch deep, somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 inch deep. We'll back up on the other ones here in a second. Pearl millet for us is about a 15 pound to the acre product because there's more seeds per pound, so we can put less pounds out there to get the same number of plants. If you're really extreme dry land, there's enough seeds per pound. I think you can get down to 10 or 12 and do a pretty darn good job in some of those scenarios. But I really like to see 15 pounds. And you can go heavier too, to thinking you're going to need to get a finer stem, but pearl millet is very prolific on tillering. There's a lot of seeds per pound and it's really prolific tillering, so you don't need all that extra seed out there.
That makes sense.
Planting depth, pearl millet, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deep. Don't go any deeper or it'll have a hard time coming up, but you need to get it probably in that 1/2 inch to 3/4 range to stay in some moisture or it gets too dry on top. So don't get too shallow. If you be too dry, don't get too deep, you'll be too deep. Forage sorghum and sorghum Sudan grass, we love to see at 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep so we get good root set. I'm telling you, I'm going to get this phone call 3 or 4 times and I'm going to see it on Facebook 15 times where a guy says, well, I put it in a fertilizer cart with my fertilizer, I spread it, and I drug it in. That's going to get us very shallow. You're not going to have a good root set. It's going to have a better tendency to fall down if you don't have a good crown set in the ground. Anything you can do to get good, consistent depth control would be best. 1 to 1.5 inches on the big seeds, 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch on the small seeded pearl millet.
Sounds good to me. Now that we've talked about the seeding and seeding rates, what would you recommend for fertility?
I'm going to grab my cheat sheet. Boop, timeout. Okay, Resume play. Fertility for sorghums. Single cut forward sorghum. We generally need a pound to a pound and a quarter of nitrogen for everyday growth out there. When you do an early forward sorghum, like our 90-day 3211 BMR, for example, you're going to need about 90 to 95 units of actual nitrogen available for that plant. So do some consideration on residual soil nitrogen, rotation with a legume crop, all those nitrogen credits that you could get, manure that was applied, and then you need to add up. So you have about 90 to 100 units of nitrogen available for that crop. You're going to need about 60 pounds of phosphorus and about 80 pounds of potassium. The fourth leg to the stool would be sulfur, which is actually nitrogen and sulfur probably number 1 and number 2 in the book of make sure you get that right. If you have 5 pounds of nitrogen, you need 1 pound of sulfur. 5-to-1 ratio. So in this scenario, 100 pounds of nitrogen is going to require 20 pounds of sulfur. A 90, 60, 80, 18 would be the recommendation on a 90-day. And then you just build out from that. If you're going up to 115, 120 days, you're going to have 126, maybe an 80, 100 on potassium and 25 pounds of sulfur. So that's kind of how that sets up for the single cut material. When you get into the sorghum Sudan grasses where you might take 2 cuttings or the pearl millet for 2 cuttings, again, if you think I'm going to cut it at 45 days, let's make sure we have 45 units of nitrogen, 9 to 10 pounds of sulfur, 35 pounds of phosphorus, and about 40 pounds of potassium. That's for that cutting. You can put on the phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur for 2 cuts, but do not put all the nitrogen on at one point, because if you put all 90 or 100 pounds of nitrogen on up front, and you cut it 45 or 50 days, you will have a high nitrate crop because it luxury consumed all the nitrogen it can find, and then it's just going to sit there and be hot. Nitrogen needs to be split applied. Everything else can go on up front. Gotcha. That is the big thing. And don't think you're going to cheat the system and get lazy and say, oh, I'm going to put all my nitrogen out up front, or I'm going to put stabilizer on it and count for that to keep it unavailable. You will have one of those scenarios where you screwed around to find out type things. So it won't be good. Ask me why I know. It's happened to multiple people, and they will call me and say, man, this first cutting is really hot. Well, how much nitrogen did you have out there? Well, yeah, I kind of didn't want to split apply, so I put it all out. And you go, I told you. It will happen.
It's a good I told you so.
It is. It's great. Well, yeah. Do you remember that conversation? They look down at their shoes and go, yeah, I know, I get it. No eye contact at that point. So that's a little bit of the fertility thing. Pearl millet, since it's basically a 2-cut scenario, and the sorghum Sudan grasses follow literally the same recipe. Going to be 45, 35, 40, and 9 pounds of sulfur on the other end. So you guys.
And then I think for one of our final topics, we're going to touch on seed treatments pretty quick. Because we know there are multiple options, especially when you look at the pricing sheet. How should a grower or retailer go through deciding which seed treatment is best for which scenario? So
good point. At Cropland, we really only offer 2 products that don't have a seed treatment on it that we call like Concept or Safen seed. So when we talk about Safen seed, that is basically, we use a compound most often called Concept. There's another one called SoarPro. There's a Vertex Select. There's 3 different options kind of in the industry right now. Most of the time we use Concept seed treatment. It's Safen, so that when you plant that seed with Safener on it, and you'd like to use like Charger Basic from Winfield or a Dual 2 Magnum, one of those S-metolachlor type pre-emerged products, it's a safener for the seeds, so it's the antidote, basically. It can grow through the pre-emerged herbicide. So there's a very select group of herbicides that it's tolerant to. I literally have everything treated except 2 products in our seed guide, and one of them was the cheap junk one, because everybody's like, hey, keep it as cheap as you can. If you can strip off another $6 or $8 a bag, do it. So we don't do any seed treatment on the honey sweet product. And the Honey Sweet BMR, we split that batch in half. So we usually do half with Concept and half without. So they have an option that's a value brand at $6 or $8 cheaper than the Concept treated. So that's the first part, the safener. Then you might see something that says safener plus systemic insecticide. We have been using Cruiser with Concept as a systemic insecticide as well. So that way, if a person might have wireworms, grubs, ants actually can hollow out seeds before they get out of the ground. So if you're in one of those high organic matter areas right next to a pasture, CRP field, lots of dry bed pack manure plus corn stalks I've seen cause issues with bugs. It's very, very useful to have the systemic insecticide on there as well. Some varieties we offer the option automatically. If you have a special request for, like this year, for example, we have a sorghum Sudan grass hybrid that a group of guys in southern Iowa said, hey, we have enough pasture and CRP around. We always get this bad edge effect from the bugs moving in. We're going to do all of our sorghum Sudan grass with systemic insecticide. So they ordered that early. We'd like to have all those early special order pieces in by the 1st of January so we can get them in the production plan and bagged appropriately. So if you have those requests, please ask me, and I might say, can you change the variety just a little bit because we're already treating product A? That might be a request from me to maybe switch the variety a little bit and make a bigger batch of another product. Systemic insecticide. We generally do about 30 to 40% of our forage sorghums have that option where you have Concept, Cruiser, or simply Concept. The sorghum Sudan grasses this year, we only had one option that actually had Cruiser on it, but you can ask. The pearl millets now, they do not respond to the safener, and we don't do any Cruiser on that either. So it will always come with just a base treatment, a little bit of fungicide to get it out of the ground, and some stored seed treatment so they don't get grain bugs in the bags. But other than that, pearl millet does not come safened or protected with Cruiser. Sorghum Sudan grasses can. Forage sorghums do. In the grain sorghum part of our market, there's only one variety that doesn't get a Cruiser treatment. Otherwise, everything is fully loaded, so we have no problems and we get the biggest crop we can. That's a little bit on seed treatments, and that's a good call out because if people use a pre-emerge herbicide, I would say there's a very good likelihood if you get a little moisture to activate it, it canopies pretty quick and you get by really well with just that pre-treatment. So it's kind of like a little bit of risk insurance because you don't know when you're going to get back in to do a post-treatment spray, and if you're wanting to go do it and the wind's blowing and it's raining and you can't get back out there, then you can get kind of a hairy mess. And you'll know it if you have a skip using a pre. You might see a few weeds come and think, oh, darn it, it didn't work very good. But then you go find that check in the corner and go, holy smokes, man, 60% control looks phenomenal right now. Yes.
Right.
I'm suggesting everybody uses it.
Especially keeping it clean from the beginning. The biggest issue, or the easiest way to control a weed is to not let it come up.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Reduce the risk way up front. So that, in a nutshell, Allie, is a lot of really basic forage sorghum Sudan grass management pieces. The great thing, folks, is we have so many neat little options. We do actually have very good post-herbicide options in forage sorghum. Sorghum Sudan grass gets a little bit more limited. The labels are basically going to give you a couple of options. We can talk about those. There's some very, very good technical support information that's been put out by South Dakota State University. If you type in sorghum weed control, they've got a really, really good tech sheet that people can use as a guide. And one more thing is we have herbicide-tolerant varieties today in forage sorghum. So there is one product that we have called 3661 DT. DT stands for double team. So it is literally tolerant to a grass herbicide that you can put in, and it works excellent to control those goofy foxtails, sandbur, fall panicum. Some of those, there's some places in the area that you cover primarily that really, really get hammered by some grassy weeds in grass crops. So double team is one, and you use a product called First Act on that. And then we have another product that's a forage sorghum single cut that is iGrowth technology, which you would use the Imiflex product. And again, very, very good on grasses and a few broadleaves. So We do have actual herbicide tolerant products to really, really keep things clean. And we still suggest start clean, use a pre up front. The post is a benefit that you can't, I mean, it's immeasurable how clean you can keep those things when you have both programs working in tandem.
Right.
Perfect set of comments and questions.
We could end with one more fun question.
Yeah.
What would be the main reason on why a grower should plant cropland forages?
Cropland forages. I think one of the reasons you should plant cropland forages is because we access a lot of really, really good hybrids from multiple breeding companies. So that's one of our superpowers, I think, is that we access the cream of the crop from about 5 different programs, and we're not just stuck with what we can breed ourselves to try to sell. So that's one big advantage. The second big advantage is I spend a lot of time growing them myself, talking to growers in the field, touching it, feeling it, doing it, running my own little trials. I like to think that between myself and the local support staff that do what you do, we have some cow-calf producers that work for our company. They're very integrated in the Cropland forage system, and they have tremendous testimonials for us to all ask, call on. So I think those are some of the biggest assets we have at Cropland is we have access to a lot of great material. We have great support staff in the background, and we have a huge distribution network where we can get seed all over the United States. I think that's another superpower that we have is we have distribution and dealers all over the U.S. So we have literally a big footprint where we can ship and share. And if we have extra supply, there's usually somebody next door with something that we can use. So those are a couple of the biggest things that I think we have as a feather for the Cropland brand. And, oh, by the way, we have this huge agronomic support system on the Winfield side. When you start talking about the crop protection, the fungicide stuff we can do, and it doesn't just go to sorghum, but talk about doing some Ascend in furrow or Ascend seed treated, some advanced coated zinc maybe on some seed. There's all kinds of stuff that we can enhance our bag of seed that we sell with our own internal knowledge and brands through Winfield. So the crop protection side has a lot to offer. We can still enhance that and add more value and more yield on the other side. I would consider some of that as well.
Definitely, it's a one-stop shop.
It is.
For one thing, and you can leave with it all.
Absolutely. Should work just fine.
Well, I think that wraps up our discussion for today. If you want to hear more from Jeff, you can find him on social media as the Forage Fan Addict. And yeah, thanks for tuning in today.
I appreciate the time and opportunity. And again, my phone is always on. It might be cluttered at times where you need to get a return phone call, but I try to make sure everybody gets a touch if they ask for one. So don't be afraid to call me, send me a message, text message. Yeah, let's go get some stuff done and make some cow chow.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.